Sure, it's Leslie, and let's release your hips. So, as I've mentioned over and over again, is how much we're overusing our hip flexors in Pilates and in so many other trainings. This section is called Release Your Hips. It is so important to release your hip flexors. We sit, we do so many different exercises that we think we're working, quote unquote, the lower abs, which essentially our deep core muscles are working about 11%. This is science-based, and our hip flexors are doing so much more. So when people say, oh, I really want to be sore here, what we're saying is set my hip flexors are on fire, which, by the way, they attach on T12. So when you look at the power of this muscle that connects the upper and lower body together, why would we want to overuse it all the time? If we really want to strengthen our core, is by learning how to hold ourselves differently. And what starts to happen with tight hip flexors is that we start to have more of this anterior carriage, right? Because of the fact of where they are starting to become very dysfunctional when they become short and tight. So with that being said, if we're going to look at creating better posture in our participants or even in ourselves, how much time do I sit? How much time do I spend over a computer, et cetera, or how much time do I do doing silly exercises, laying on the ground, doing crunches? Again, you want a strong core, start to hold yourself differently and your core will become stronger. Now, not everybody has, a reformer at home. So if you have a reformer and you're working on a reformer, then by placing the left foot back and the right foot, we all know this is Eve's lunge. So typically what people do is they get very flexed when they're doing this movement. Or if they have knee issues, being in an upright or vertical position is actually a little more challenging on the body. So when we go into wanting to release the hip flexors, the most important thing is what are we doing to that superficial front line? So by pressing back into our lunge and then looking over the shoulder, maybe even taking a little bit of rotation here, we're going to open up the hip tremendously and a nice bend to the front knee. Now, the other option here too is to go less spring, which I just did, and keeping my hand here, and then adding even larger rotation here is opening up the spiral line as well to lengthen the hip. So what we're looking at here is a weighted, if you will, same thing if I were doing this movement on the mat, and being a little bit more upright. And once again, when I start to spiral and rotate, I notice the difference in what I'm feeling in the hip. As you reach the arm above you, this even deepens a nice lengthening of my hip. When we start to move slightly forward, it's going to be a lot more glute and hamstring. If you have a bad knee, then, for example, that's not going to feel really comfortable. So an alternative where gravity doesn't have an influence is placing a ball underneath that same hip. The other one is on the mat. Both legs are extended, and I reach the same arm over my head, which allows me to get a nice deep lengthening coming from a different place. But at the end of the day, whether I'm standing or I'm supine, my hip is extended. So what we're doing is asking that hip flexor to lengthen as opposed to being in a shortened position. So by being here and just breathing into this hip, and you can flex the foot, extend the foot, whichever you prefer, but now you start to lengthen into that superficial front line. So once again, when we look at so many of our Pilates exercises, from being here to being here, et cetera, we're overusing our hip flexors so much. And I want you to think about the fact too, that when we start to talk about fascia, everything is connected. So when you're placing your hands on your neck, for example, and you notice like your sternocleidomastoids are relatively, they're relatively relaxed. That's where they need to be. Jut your head forward. And I want you to then start to palpate, what are you feeling in your neck? That's what we're doing as well when we're doing all this flexion exercises, is by bringing the head more forward, we're creating a lot more stress on the tissue, but a lot more stress on the cervical spine. So it's all connected. And if we can kind of go deeper and realize that our fascia plays such a huge role in everything, then maybe we'll choose to train our bodies a little kinder. This is Leslie, and I hope this gives you a few tips on the importance of releasing your hip flexors.